Hello, I'm Dave Crocker, Principal with Brandenburg InternetWorking and a MAAWG Senior Technical Advisor. And I'm here with Josh Benaloh, Senior Cryptographer with Microsoft Research. He is at MAAWG this time to receive the J.D. Falk Award on behalf of himself and 14 co-authors for a paper called Keys Under Doormats that fundamentally altered the public discussion about what's called exceptional access. He had a ceremony presentation and also gave a tutorial about the substance of the paper, and we're here to chat a little bit about issues surrounding the paper and around the public discussion. Josh, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dave. On behalf of myself and all of the authors, we're very honored and appreciative of this award.
Well, we're appreciative of your work. I was intrigued to notice, besides the number of authors, that you folks span what really is about 3 generations of security expertise.
Indeed.
And that many people in a discipline can come to an agreement about something, that many people with that much experience was really quite impressive. Your tutorial session that you've already done, of course, goes into depth. For simplicity, for those watching the video, can you summarize very briefly the main points of the paper?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the main thing that we studied in this work was to look at the requirements that had been suggested, unfortunately rather vaguely, by various law enforcement officials for what kind of access they were seeking to plain text data from various devices or communications. It's not even completely clear what was being sought. And in looking at the suggestions, we tried to analyze what might be possible, what might be reasonable without great harm to internet security. And the conclusion that we came to, unfortunately, is that we could not find any way of meeting the requests of law enforcement officials without seriously weakening the security of the internet, which is already rather fragile.
Not so good, yes. Given the regular reports of very massive break-ins and compromise, it is a bit odd that anyone would say, please make it weaker.
It's concerning. I think all of us understand the reasons, and there are legitimate reasons for the request. We just don't see a way to make it happen. So
there were 3 sort of topics or categories that the paper seemed to cover. I think of them as the 3 bullets that are listed in the executive summary, which is a very nice 2 to 3 pages and very tractable. One was the simple point that this produces weaker security in an area that already is weaker than one would want, and it actually prevents use of some of the best practices that are available. The second was it adds to complexity, and especially in security, when you add complexity, you decrease reliability and utility. And the third was it creates an attractive target, the place holding the keys.
Yeah, so all 3 of these were concerns, and there were other concerns that we saw, but I can go into some detail on each of these. In the first case, there have been many vulnerabilities in the internet. We are trying to improve things, and there's an incompatibility between what we would need to do to satisfy some of the law enforcement requests and some of the directions that we're moving to try to improve security. A good example of that is forward secrecy, which is something that many companies are aggressively trying to implement so that there aren't long-term vulnerable keys that, if compromised, would create massive breaches and cause data that's been perhaps transmitted or stored for years to all be compromised. And instead to have it be that we are using short-term keys that are deleted as soon as we're done with them. This is the method of with so-called forward secrecy, the keys are ephemeral, they're temporary, and as soon as a transmission is complete or the data is no longer needed, then the keys are deleted and they cannot be recovered. Having some sort of a long-term golden key in the hands of either law enforcement or even a vendor or a service provider goes against that and takes us a step backwards. The second area you mentioned, I believe, was complexity, and that we mentioned as well. And yeah, it's often said that complexity is the enemy of security. It's the more complex a system is, the harder it is to try to lock it down and make sure there aren't any vulnerabilities. And
I think it was Steve Bellman's clip that actually characterized this as adding a layer of mechanism. And so it's not complexity in some abstract concept, it's adding to the architecture.
It is very much so. We want to keep something that's very simple, that transmits a message or stores a message in one local place, and as soon as you start adding a third party, in any form, then there's also a third-party access regimen, which is very complicated. We don't understand, even today, who it would be that would have access. This is a multinational, multi-jurisdictional request that says that devices that are perhaps designed in the US, manufactured in China, bought in the United Kingdom, used in Russia to call somebody in Syria or contact somebody in Syria, is an example I gave in the presentation. Exactly who is it that would have access to the keys and the communications? We just don't know how to address that. I believe the third item on the list of things that we raised is the concentration of targets. And
right.
That is a major problem. When you put something very valuable in a single place, you make it a very easy target for an attacker to try to say, all I need to do is get this one item in this one place, rather than many separate attacks. And you've got sort of the keys to the store in some sense. This
isn't just keys to the kingdom, it's keys to many kingdoms.
To everyone's kingdom, everyone's house. It's almost as though you take everyone's front door key and you lock it in a vault at the police station. Even the local police station was probably going to do a very good job, but there is a whole new attack vector that's there now. Instead of breaking into your house directly, maybe I know somebody at the local police station. Maybe there's an insider. Maybe I know there's a time when it's not being guarded. It adds complexity. It also adds that concentration that says, I can get at everybody's information all at once by attacking. And we saw the Office of Personnel Management attack was, here is a nice place that has data on every government employee. Let's just go after that.
And in fact, there's now enough of a pattern of compromises across many different organizations that it isn't clear there are any examples of a category of organization that hasn't been broken into, and broken into fundamentally.
I wish I could find a category, but I agree completely. I don't know of any examples.
So I'd like to look at the work of the paper in terms of a little bit under, a little bit over, and a little bit around. And by under, there's some foundational issues. What was most interesting to me as a reaction to your paper was the one government response that said, you folks just aren't trying hard enough. And when I reference the 3 generations, that's 40 or so years of effort. And I wonder if there are any avenues that haven't been explored, that could be explored, that they might have had in mind.
I don't know of any. We tried very sincerely to look at ways in which these requests might be satisfied. We didn't come to this discussion with a doctrinaire view of we must find a way to stop this without even looking at it. I was somewhat dismayed by the point that you just made. This came from FBI Director James Comey during the Senate hearings. It might have been elsewhere, but as well, but in particular there, he made the rather shrewd, I think, request that that law enforcement not figure out how this is done. It's up to the technologists in industry with the suggestion that, well, you folks are smart. You can figure out a way to do this. This makes it a lot more difficult for us to say that we can't find a way because we don't have a specific system that we can.
There's something about proving the negative.
It's certainly much harder. So all we can really say is that we can't find a way to do this. We don't know of a way. And that we believe that with the current technology that's available, and especially the current infrastructure that we have to work with, that there is no way to do this. We might be wrong. If we are wrong, we would be very happy to have someone find a way to meet the legitimate needs of law enforcement without weakening the security of individuals. That would be wonderful. We don't know a way of doing that without, at the very least, re-engineering the entire internet. And
well, that shouldn't take very long.
No, that, next week perhaps. But I do rather resent the sense of we haven't tried hard enough. Maybe somebody can find a way to do this. I have tried. I can't.
Well, in fact, the 15 of you have been trying, along with many other people in the industry. My sense, in fact, is that very high quality, essentially impenetrable security probably has been achieved in smaller scale, but that there isn't any solid example at internet scale.
Perhaps. I tend to think that there is no perfect security, and it's really, to some extent, a matter of cost, of how much one is willing to spend to attack versus how much one is willing to spend to defend something. There are some things that are certainly very valuable targets that a lot has been spent to defend. I would suggest nuclear missile command and control is one example. There's a lot of effort to spend that to protect these systems. Fort Knox is another example of the US gold reserve.
You mean Goldfinger wasn't true?
I don't think so.
I'm devastated.
I've never been there personally, so I can't say this for certain, but cases like this are cases where one can devote a lot of resources and try to do a good deal to make it so that it's not worth attacking. And that's usually the goal of the security expert, to make it so that yes, we know you can attack it, but it's not going to be worth your while to do so. Your benefit will be less than your cost.
So the examples you're giving, though, are at the level of military and national security.
Yeah.
And the space we're talking about now is really what I think would be called commercial security. And the resources are far more modest.
Right, and it's even more than that, because it's not just at the commercial level. We're talking about millions of devices spread throughout the world, and not necessarily a great deal of expertise managing each of these devices, which is fine. The internet is not something that only experts should have access to. But we have to be cognizant of that and realistic about that and understand what we can expect. And expecting that kind of security in that environment, I don't know how to achieve it without bankrupting the economy.
Okay, and you said millions, but again, my impression is we're talking about essentially every user in the world. Yeah. So 6+ billion, and with Internet of Things, 10, 20, 100 times that.
Yeah, there's certainly billions of devices, probably by now billions of people. Certainly not everyone is on the internet, but we're getting closer to that, yes.
Because of smartphones in particular, that
Yes.
number is rising really quite quickly.
Indeed.
So that was the under. The around, your presentation during the ceremony was really about the process of developing the paper. and you went through the history quite thoroughly. What I'd like to ask you about is the challenges, and to the extent you can share any dirt with us, the problems that cropped up during the process of developing this paper among that many people. And of those of you I know, I wouldn't say anyone was weak-willed or quiet.
No. This was 15 very strong-willed individuals who are used to getting their way, but who are also very reasonable people. These were people who were a joy to work with, and are willing to accept that their approach might not be what most people want to do. The thing that made this effort work, and the thing that I think would be almost necessary in any similar effort, is to have somebody who is sort of the respected center. And in this case, it was Danny Weitzner. Danny Weitzner initiated the effort, brought us together again. We had done a similar effort, or many of us had been part of a similar effort nearly 20 years ago. And he's the one that rang the bell and said, things are happening, maybe we should get together, and we all agreed. And he managed the process with a wonderful touch. He wasn't overbearing in any way, but at the same time, we would have discussions on issues, we would have some strong disagreements, and when we had our say, Danny would come in and say, okay, let's do it this way. And it was completely reasonable in all of our minds to make a decision like that and move on. We had a short time frame, which in some sense was a challenge, but in some sense helped, because we knew we couldn't spend time fighting over details ad infinitum. And we knew that maybe these decisions weren't perfect, but they were good decisions and they were fair decisions, and that's all that was necessary.
Are there any examples of really interesting disagreements that you think?
Actually, I wouldn't think that these are things that people would find that interesting, because they weren't differences of substance. They were really pedagogical differences. They were presentation, what should be emphasized, what should be included, how things should be organized. The example I like to refer to, and the example I used in the presentation I gave, was the title. Because we had several possibilities, not a lot of time. The keys and doormats metaphor is something that I liked and I had encouraged. But there were a few versions of that, and different people had different preferences within that. And there were still a few people who were among the authors who thought this was a terrible analogy, and we should, instead of using a metaphor of some sort, we should be very explicit and talk about mandating insecurity as the...
Oh, the subtitle was really nice that way, of mandating insecurity, yeah. But I quite liked the metaphor. The reality in an effort like this, in a paper like this, is you're marketing an issue, and a thing that helps people understand the core message is really quite helpful.
Yeah. That's why I think that most of us liked having the short title that we could refer to, and it makes it easier to refer to the paper. When we had gone through a similar effort nearly 20 years ago, we never really had a good title, and we were aware of the difficulties that posed. So having something short that we could point to.
So what you're saying is you converged on the three main bullets that we summarized earlier fairly quickly.
I think, yes. I think we converged on those probably at our initial face-to-face meeting at Columbia as three main points that we need to talk about. We also decided on this concept of featuring scenarios. We had two scenarios within the paper that we featured as examples. I don't think we ever all agreed that presenting scenarios was the best way to do this, but we decided to try it, and it seemed to work out well enough so that we kept this in the paper. The two scenarios we focused on were communications and a an instance of data stored on a device, such as a mobile phone, and what would be required to provide access in either of those two cases. So we featured those as examples, and then generalized from those examples what would be necessary there and what would be necessary in other cases.
So you presented the paper, released the paper the day before US Senate hearings, and profoundly affected that discussion. And things have progressed along, and we had the recent announcement from the US Federal Administration that they were going to back off from this requirement. What's your sense of, besides that good news, the general sense of things now, your current assessment?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure that the administration ever said they were seeking legislation on this. They floated a few trial balloons, and the legislation, the executive branch is not a monolithic unit here. There are different factions within that wanted different things, so some were certainly suggesting legislation. Some seemed to think that was a bad idea, and I think perhaps influenced by us to some small measure, that faction won out, and there was a decision made not to try to pursue legislation. We're certainly happy that that's the case. Of course, that could change in the next administration, or if there's some event that happens, and that's always something that we need to be concerned about, of not overreacting if there is some significant event that does take place. Yes, we want to try to do all we can to prevent these things, but that is within reason. And we don't want to suddenly say, oh no, something bad has happened, we must curtail all civil liberties. So in this case right now, I'd say yes, no legislation is a good thing, but it's not absolutely a good thing. And the reason is that legislation is overt. We can look at legislation, we can see exactly what's being proposed, we can offer counter-arguments to aspects that we think are unreasonable, and have an open debate. What seems to be being pursued now is a voluntary strategy. And the concern about a voluntary strategy is what incentives or what disincentives are being shown to possible vendors. It may well be that government agencies will say, we would really like to purchase this very large number of licenses, or this large equipment order is something we'd like to make, but you have to make this change for us in order for this purchase to go through. You have to agree that perhaps not even just our products, our purchases, but all products you sell in the future might provide this kind of access. And I'm concerned that backdoor deals might be made that might not even be public. We might not know that there is some sort of, some access point, some hole. FBI Director Comey likes to say, no, we don't want a backdoor. We want an overt front door. And I would certainly prefer it to be a front door. I'm concerned that in a backroom deal, we might get backdoors that nobody even knows about, or at least the public doesn't know about. Certainly some would know.
So that says that it behooves us to look for ways to have ongoing alertness about this issue, possibly even at the level of building into contracts requirements for divulging access that may not have been authorized by the purchaser.
I would certainly like to see as much made public as possible. People often don't realize that sunshine actually helps security. There's a term that's often used of security through obscurity, of trying to feel that you've secured things by hiding things under the rug or not showing them. And it turns out, and this dates back, about 130 years to Kirchhoff, the principle of making your security design public. And that actually, somewhat counterintuitively, makes for better security. And we certainly want that in this case. Kirchhoff did this in the context of lock manufacturers. The idea was that you don't have to make your lock design secret as long as people have their own keys and the keys are secret. And this was a brilliant step forward at the time. And some industries have accepted this approach. Some of it, interestingly, the lock industry has now stepped back from that, and they believe that the idea of being a master locksmith is something that should be a closely guarded secret, and things that can be done within that industry are not to be shared with people outside of the Masters Guild. But an interesting example of an industry that has embraced this is the gaming industry. They have a lot of money on the line, but they're very open about the vulnerabilities they've discovered. You can, as an individual, attend a conference and see what vulnerabilities have been discovered in gaming equipment. Have they been exploited? Have they been patched? And with the amount that they have on the line there, I think we should take that as an indication that sunshine really is a good thing for at least that industry that has certainly the option of going underground and private, and they found it's better to be open. I think this is the case for other industries as well, and that we really would like to have an open look at what security is being planned, and if there is some sort of access requirement being made, let's look at it openly and let's decide how it can best be done, if it can be done at all reasonably.
Okay, let's finish with the over, and that's the larger view. The activity you and the rest of the authors engaged in was a case of providing technical input to socio-political debate. And there's always a challenge in doing that. I'm wondering if there are any lessons that might be learned about how this was done, since it was done well and effectively. But the question is how to abstract that to other social and political topics that might come up. Part of the challenge here is in that world, they're used to feeling that the truth or the right answer is somehow a mixture between extremes. And in the technical world, we sometimes do feel that also, but mostly it's that there are real technical constraints and that we have to live within those.
Yeah, well, one thing that we tried very hard to do, and this was a self-imposed requirement right from the outset, was that we would stick to the technical side of this. If there are political decisions to be made, we would point these out, like the difficulty in building some sort of a system which had multinational access. These are questions that need to be resolved, and we point them out, but we're not going to delve into the politics. We have technical expertise. We want to offer that technical expertise and not to suggest that our expertise goes beyond that. That would undermine our credibility in various respects. So we do want to very much stick to the technical and suggest that other people have political expertise. Now, some of our group, others more than I, do have some very good political expertise as well. So I can't take any credit for the machinations that took place in getting this report released right before Senate hearings. I heard about the hearings from other members of the group and the contacts that helped bring this forward at the right time. I can't take any of the credit for.
It certainly didn't hurt to have the New York Times article appear the day before column 1 above the fold.
Indeed, that was very gratifying to all of us. There are some members of the group who had the name of this New York Times reporter on in their address lists, not me. Although this is somebody I have talked to in the past. Nicole Pearl Roth is her name, who wrote the article. And she did a great job. We really liked the article. Everything was above boards. It was embargoed, but we gave her the report. She wrote an article about the report. There was no back and forth beyond that. But there was the contact of, this would be good to get into the media. Here's a good person to go with, and that certainly helps. And there are some good technology reporters out there, and forging relationships there certainly seems to be a helpful aspect in trying to influence the public discourse. But still, we need to remember that our expertise is technology and not to try to overstep ourselves, or we risk losing credibility and not having the impact that we would like.
Well, Josh, again, congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.